Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2017 UNIDO Conference. My name is Yalda Hakim. I'm a presenter and an anchor for BBC World News. And I hear this is the final day of your conference. The BBC has sent out a search party because most of their presenters and anchors have spent all week here. And so I'm here to wrap up this event. Thank you. Is that better? So I'm here to wrap up this event. I understand some people are still trying to come in. If you can take a seat so we can kick off the sessions. When I was asked to moderate the event here, I was absolutely delighted to do so. I've done a lot of work on the continent. I understand its potentials and its challenges and the priorities that need to be put in place. And I just wanted to give you some facts and statistics before we begin. By 2050, Africa will be home to 2 billion people. The labour force will be increased by 910 million on the continent by 2050. So it just goes to show it can become a huge economic powerhouse. And really, our expert panellists will be discussing this today. We'll have 3 panels, and they'll be discussing the policies, the priorities, and the enforcement to ensure that over the next decade, the continent of Africa really does become an economic powerhouse. I'd like to welcome our honorary guests, and I'd like to begin by asking Mr. Lee Yong, the Director General of UNIDO, to give us some opening remarks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Yada, and the Excellencies, honorable guests. The third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, which was announced by the UN General Assembly in July 2016. But I just would like to mention a little bit more about my feeling about this title. Your Excellencies, colleagues, helping African countries to develop industry, IDDA3, is already being recognized by the international community. But how to help Africa leapfrog its industrial development, it is a very important topic today for all of us. Only 2 months ago, on September 21st, we held a high-level side event on IDDA3 on the margins of a 72nd United Nations General Assembly in New York, and attended by the number of heads of state, high-level UN officials, and representatives of the international financial institution and the private sector. We discussed the way to progress from the political commitment made by UN General Assembly and by international community on actions on the ground, how we can move ahead with implementation. An important outcome of the event was joint communique that was agreed by the co-organizer, UNIDO, African Union Commission, and UNECA, and African Development Bank, and the Office of Special Advisor on Africa of Secretary General. Excellency, honorable guests, and ladies and gentlemen, today's side event really builds on the momentum of this event in New York, and it confirms that industrialization is essential for sustainable economic development, economic growth, and poverty alleviation. Countries that are today classified as developed have all gone through industrial development. Those emerging market economy also either in the process or moving very fast with new developments of the industrial development. Therefore, the desire of developing countries of industrialization is not unfounded. And African countries have been seeking the change, the structure of their economies by increasing the share of manufacturing sector in international in national investment, national economic output, and trade. This resolve is stressed in the African Union's Agenda 2063 and in the development agenda of African countries and regional economic communities. It is also echoed by UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in particular Sustainable Development Goal 9, which is focused on the building resilient infrastructure, promoting sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation. Excellencies, colleagues, we know that many requirements must be fulfilled to achieve industrial transformation in Africa, which are 54 countries located, and 2/3 of least developed countries located. These include carefully designing and implementing industrial policies, industrial strategies, and effective mobilization and deployment of financial resources, and promoting industrial entrepreneurship and building industrial knowledge and skills capacities, strengthening industrial development advocacy and regulation through appropriate institutions, advancing innovation and technology, and enhancing energy efficiency, and promoting climate change resilience. And moreover, markets must be effectively leveraged for industrial transformation. This requires the deepening and broadening regional economic integration, as well as meaningful integration of Africa economies into the global economy. Both cases require comprehensive arrangements and concrete actions covering industrial investments, industrial production, and trade in manufactured goods. And through a blend of existing new and innovative development intervention measures, IDDA3 is expected to become a game changer which can radically transform the structure of Africa's economies and jumpstart them towards industrialization. Colleagues, friends, with a former in mind, this event gives us a unique opportunity to discuss 3 interrelated measures which are critical for sustainable industrial development. First, policies, laws, regulations, including industrial data and statistics. Second, strategies. And third, mobilization and deployment of the diverse financial and non-financial resources. We look forward to useful insights surrounding broad-based industrial policies, laws, and regulations. The prospects to improve the framework conditions into policies, laws, and regulations should enable African countries to fully explore their industrial development potential by systematically eliminating the prevailing bottlenecks and the gaps. In this context, it is also important to pay special attention to the industrial statistics which support evidence-based policies and strategies. We also expect inputs that can guide improvement of industrialization strategies, both in terms of content and the targeting of intervention measures, in order to achieve inclusive and sustainable industrialization. Furthermore, we anticipate exchange of ideas surrounding the mobilization of different types of financial resources and non-financial resources on how to wisely deploy them. Excellency, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, in order to ensure successful implementation of IDDA3, special attention should also be given to the building strong partnerships. Bearing in mind UNIDO's responsibility to lead the implementation of IDDA3, we have developed a roadmap to guide the process and put at its center UNIDO's program for country partnership approach, which is an innovative way to support a country to have a larger scale industrial sector transformation. The PCP approach is connected to 4 preconditions for the achievement of IDDA3. First, government ownership. Second, and leadership, strengthening the enabling business environment, a sectoral focus, some pillars under the industrial sector, and financial and non-financial resources need to be deployed. The approach is crucial for mobilizing external partners and additional resources to enhance the development impact of our activities. My deputy, Hiroshi, will elaborate on these issues during his intervention in the panel. We will discuss strategies for IDDA3 implementation. Your Excellencies, colleagues, friends, to conclude, I just would like to emphasize that we have no option as a collective but to achieve our objectives. IDDA3 should yield a result and bring into a successful conclusion, and the previous efforts enshrined in IDDA1 and 2, as well as other initiatives, it should set Africa on a path to sustainable industrial transformation, inclusive, more diversified, more resilient economies. Therefore, as we move ahead, I appeal to all the participants to use this event to deliberate on how we can pour our efforts and resources in support of the inclusive and sustainable industrialization in Africa. The achievements that we aspire for should be visibly verified through the job creation, income generation, wealth creation, thereby contribute collectively to poverty alleviation. I'm very confident that today's event is one more important step towards consolidating support for industrial development in African countries. And also, I look at a list of panels, very high level, very much experienced, and some of them are our partners. Some of them actually already contribute a lot to the African industrialization. I'm particularly happy now, two sides of me was a minister of Niger and also ambassador from Angola, to actually also make some presentations to begin this important discussion. I thank you for participating into this in this very important event. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am.
So much, sir, and you've made some critical points there about strong partnership and the fact that you'd like to see IDDA3 be a game changer for the continent. And really, this is what we'd like to put to the audience. We'd like you to be as interactive with this as possible and for you to share your expertise as well. So we have developed an app. It's the UNIDO event app, and really to highlight what the Director General there said, how to ensure the success of this, and we will be asking you to download that app so that you can be very much a part of this event. So the question there for the app, so that you can be taking part, is what do you consider the most critical elements to ensure successful implementation of IDDA3? So the questions are various different points are there for you. Download the app, and we'll show you the results of the poll at the end of this, and we'll have another poll later on as well, so I urge you to download that app. So let's move on now. We have a special video message from Her Excellency Ms. Maria Shartadova, the President of ECOSOC. She wasn't able to make it here today, but has sent us a special message.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to send a message at the beginning of this important side event, as I am unable to join you in person. Allow me to underscore the commitment of the Economic and Social Council to being an effective, transparent global platform in support of Africa's poverty eradication and sustainable development efforts. ECOSOC is the locus for supporting implementation and tracking global progress of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It provides a unique space for member states and other stakeholders to convene, share knowledge, and forge solutions to obstacles challenging development progress. This includes forging solutions to advance the structural transformation needed across Africa in support of inclusive growth, widespread job creation, and enhanced social inclusion. In 2016-2017, at the initiative of the 71st President of ECOSOC, my predecessor, Ambassador Frederick Shava of Zimbabwe, the Council addressed the important topic of infrastructure development and industrialization. A special meeting of ECOSOC was convened in May 2017, which was preceded by 2 preparatory events in Dakar, Senegal, and in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. These meetings brought together key stakeholders from governments, the private sector, financing institutions, and the UN system to discuss policy options and obstacles to building resilient infrastructure and promoting sustainable industrialization in developing countries, particularly countries in special situations, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. One of the many recommendations emerging from the special meeting was the recognition of the catalytic and cross-cutting role of infrastructure development and sustainable industrialization to implement the 2030 Agenda. 2 concrete initiatives for scaling up support of the 2030 Agenda were announced at the ECOSOC special meeting. UNIDO's program for country partnership and the Accelerated Agribusiness and Agro-Industry Initiative, or 3ADI. I understand from UNIDO and FAO colleagues that implementation of both initiatives is in full speed. ECOSOC will continue to support these efforts, including through engagement and follow-up on their progress. I look forward to continuing the close collaboration between ECOSOC and all who are partnering in their implementation. I thank you and wish you a productive meeting.
Thank you to Ms. Marie Shardatova, the President of ECOSOC. Can I now ask on His Excellency, Mr. Amiro Malam Zanaidu, the Minister of Industry for Niger, to address us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you. Distinguished Director General of UNIDO, Director General of the United Nations in Vienna, Madam Ambassador of Angola, President of the African Group in Vienna, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ministers, distinguished participants, ambassadors, and representatives. The first meeting of the Special Technical Committee on Trade, Industry, and Mineral Resources that was held at the ministerial level from the 23rd to the 24th of May in 2016 at the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, adopted a declaration that took up industrial development as the foundation for inclusive and sustainable development. This topic is closely linked to the declaration of the third decade for industrial development in Africa, IDDA3, that covers 2016 to 2025. I would like to recall that Resolution A/RES/70/293, establishing IDDA3, especially requests that the United Nations Organization for Industrial Development should establish and put in place a special program for the third decade of industrial development for Africa, and to be responsible for its implementation. This is in line with its mandate and should be based on voluntary contributions. It also takes into consideration the African Union Plan of Action for helping Africa leapfrog its industry and development. The African Union Conference at its 10th ordinary session, which was held in Addis Ababa on the 31st of January to the 2nd of February 2008, also meant that the Director General of UNIDO made a commitment to mobilize the necessary resources for the implementation of this third decade. Now, given this development, UNIDO must take the appropriate provisions in order to facilitate creating better links to established joint initiatives to boost industrialization. To do this, the transfer of technology based on jointly elaborated modalities, as well as access to ICT technology, diversifying production, the development of value-added chains in the agro-industrial sector, strengthening capacity building, the establishing renewable energies, and using energy more rationally. All of these are priorities, we believe. Let us also not forget the creation of special economic zones and industrial parks. We also need to fight climate change and to tap into human resources. We need to do this by strengthening the public-private partnerships with the whole range of stakeholders and partners from the public and private sectors, from civil society, and from educational institutions. Now, in view of all of the above, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we encourage our organization to establish all the necessary strategic partnership in order for efficient and effective implementation of the goals of the third decade. I would also like to exhort all member states of UNIDO, as well as all of the African development partners, to provide sufficient financial and non-financial resources in order to make this vision a reality. As I said earlier, Director General, I fully endorse what you have just said. We can only be successful if we work together. We must work hand in hand, and I truly believe that we will be able to achieve excellent results if we do this, and if we all work together to achieve the goals of the third decade. Thank you very much, and I wish you every success in this meeting.
Thank you very much. And as you've pointed out, the importance of working hand in hand is crucial to this. Can I now also ask Her Excellency Ms. Maria de Jesus Ferreira, Ambassador of Angola and current chair of the African Group, for her opening statements.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Director Li Hong, Director General of UNIDO, Son Excellence, Monsieur le Ministre de l'Industrie du Niger,
Excellency, the Minister of Niger,
honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my pleasure for addressing you on behalf of African Group at this very important side event on how to make Africa foster its industrial development. The event comes as a follow-up on UNIDO's high-level event titled The Third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, From Political Commitment to Actions on the Ground, which was organized on 21st September 2017 in New York, in the margin of 72nd session of UN General Assembly. This occasion offers the African stakeholders and development partners the opportunity to deliberate about the Third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, IDDA3, since its proclamation in 2016. Excellencies, honorable guests, and ladies and gentlemen. The African Group believes that IDDA3 is an important strategy industrialization process of Africa and requires a rigorous implementation roadmap. In this regard, let me stress a few points concerning the perceptions and anticipations of the African Group about IDDA initiative and its implementation. To begin with, we are glad that the General Assembly mandated UNIDO to take the lead in the development, operationalization and implementation of the IDD3 initiative as contained in the resolution on the matter, and we have looked forward to receive the comprehensive roadmap that will guide the process and have constant consultations with all other stakeholders. Indeed, we acknowledge that African industrialization requires ownership and the leadership by African countries along with the support of other partners and stakeholders. In this regard, the role of UNIDO is as equally required to achieve the expectations and objectives of the IDDA3. We are mindful that the realization of the ambitious goals of the initiatives is predicted upon the mobilizing and prudent development of significant amounts of resources, which necessitates both the broadening the spectrum and stakeholders and the strengthening of cooperation among them. Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, the group considers that all the efforts made by UNIDO enhance industrialization process in Africa, including the Industrialized Africa cooperation involving UNIDO, AFDB, and UNECA, and Program for Country Partnership, PCP, to expedite African states industrialization. Furthermore, the creation of multi-stakeholders oversight platforms can ensure an effective management of undertaking involving many stakeholders, such as IDDA3. These platforms underline further the resolve for broad-based cooperation and shall also contribute to the enhancement of partnerships in support of the implementation of the IDDA3 initiative. Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the African acknowledged the importance of industrialization to achieve economic growth and development in Africa. Africa is a continent with great potential, and it is on the path to an environmentally sustainable and socio-economically inclusive industrial transformation. In this regard, the implementation of the IDDA3 can only enhance this industrialization process and bring support to African states. I'm confident that today's event will raise awareness about the importance of the IDDA3 process for the industrialization of Africa and will serve as a forum to generate useful ideas and really political support and commitment from key stakeholders for Africa's development priorities in support of the implementation of the IDDA3. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And finally, for our opening remarks, there's another video message from Mr. Jose Graziano da Silva, Director General of FAO.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I cannot attend in person this special event on the third Industrial Development Decade for Africa. I want to thank the DG of UNIDO, my dear friend Lee Young, for his leadership. The IDDA3 highlights the crucial importance of the agro-industrialization for African countries as a pathway to eradicate poverty and hunger. In fact, the agri-food sector can generate many benefits in the African continent. It can create job opportunities, especially for young people. It can contribute to connect small farmers to the markets, and it can also help to deliver healthy and safer food to consumers. But to realize all this potential, many challenges need to be addressed. Infrastructure needs to improve. Education systems need to provide youth with the needed skills. And policies and regulatory systems need to stimulate better nutrition outcomes. This can only be possible through partnerships that involve the public sector, the private sector, and also civil society. Last April in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, FAO, UNIDO, and partners launched the initiative called Accelerate Agribusiness and Agri-Industry Initiative Plus. This initiative aims to increase the proportion of agriculture produce in Africa that is transformed into high-value products. The 3ADI Plus will support the investment program Forge Partnership and also link up with other global and regional initiatives. It will be important to put food systems development in Africa on a sustainable path and also in line with the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development. I wish all of you a productive event. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. De Silva, and that concludes our opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank our honourable guests before we start the sessions? So, ladies and gentlemen, we were just hearing there about the importance of leadership, of public and private societies, as well as the civil society, working together to implement change across the continent. And really, this is what our next three panels will be looking to discuss. Our first panel will focus on policies, and that's what our expert panelists will be discussing. Its focus will be policy imperatives for the IDDA3 implementation. So can I please call on our panelists to come on stage? His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abtu, the Minister of Industry for Ethiopia. His Excellency Mr. Musa Mohammed Krama Hamid, Minister of Industry for Sudan. His Excellency Mr. Marcel Ilunga Liu, Minister of Industries for the DRC. Mr. Neil Pierre, Chief of the Policy Coordination Branch of UNDESA. And Mr. Oliver J.M. Chiganga, Director of the African Centre for Statistics, UNECA. Thank you. So I don't know, before we begin, whether we can have some of those results of those polls up. I trust that you've all downloaded those apps and you've put down your thoughts. We'd really like you to yes, so we can see there up on the screen that 54% of you have said all of the above to those things. And we really wonder whether your views will change by the end of these sessions. So we will ask you another question at the end of these sessions, so please do participate. There are some interesting polls there. So really, I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Ahmed Abtu. Ethiopia has done incredibly well. We just heard there about the importance of agriculture, and Ethiopia has thrived because of its agricultural industry. So what we'd like you to do is to really highlight some of the key lessons that could benefit other agriculturally strong African countries.
Thank you, moderator. I would like to share you the Ethiopian experience in designing policy and implementation. I think it is very difficult to have a similar policy for all countries because we have different situations. So the good thing is we have to internalize the general principles and align with each country's situations. It is scientific that priority among the sectors and integration with those sectors is vital in policy designing. We Ethiopians design agricultural development lead industrialization to use our resource, abundant resource wisely and widely, and scarce resource with safely. So you have to identify a sector which use abundantly your resource, abundant resource wisely, and scarce resource very safely, and you have to give a priority for that sector. And you have to commit yourself to invest at least 10% of your GDP in this sector. What we did is this one. We give priority for agricultural sector because we do have abundant human power, and we do have abundant land and water. We have a scarce resource of capital and technology and modern management. So we see that agriculture is the best sector and is our priority to use our abundant resources wisely and to save our scarce resources. And that's, we call it agricultural development industrialization. This is in terms of priority of the sector. And we have to integrate the industry sector. You know, you don't wait until the agricultural sector is developed. That is not good enough. So we have to integrate at initial stage the industry sector with the agricultural sector, so we have to make value addition in the inputs or in the outputs coming from the agricultural sector to penetrate in the international market and to have higher value addition, which lead to a higher economic growth. And with this combination of policy framework and commitments of the Ethiopian government to invest 40% of the GDP, and out of that 10% of the GDP for agricultural sector in accessing for the farmers physical, social and physical infrastructure, avail of social and physical structures, especially constructing of dam for irrigation purpose, and availing of extension workers at county level, at farm level, and access to finance with reasonable collaterals or without even collaterals, with different modalities for getting inputs and availability of technologies, especially high-yield seeds and fertilizers and other technologies. So what I would like to recommend for you is you have to see your resource, which is scarce and which is abundant, and you have to develop a policy which allow you to use your abundant resource wisely and to use your scarce resource with safely. So this kind of policy will leverage your economic growth. And what we enjoy now is this one. And it is not forever. Such kind of priority has a time limit. You know, when your resource improvement, when you improve your capital through saving, when you improve your technology, when you improve your management systems, now the industry becomes a leader. Now Ethiopia is in a transition from our cultural development lead industrialization to industrial lead economic development. Thank you very much.
You've made some really important points there. You spoke about using resources wisely and widely and prioritizing the right sector. This is where I'd like to bring in Mr. Hamid, because as we know, Sudan is resource rich, especially when it comes to gold and oil. So what can resource rich nations like yours do to promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization?
Thank you, Ella. Hello, everybody. Yes, as I'll start from your last statement. Really, that's a very critical and crucial statement, using resources wisely. The case of Sudan, we had a period where we enjoyed income from oil, petroleum exportation, and a huge income that came to Sudan in a very short period of time. But I should confess saying that we have not used that wisely, like our Ethiopian neighbors. It's true, it has gone into infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of dams, in terms of bridges. That's true, telecommunications. But I think what we missed is that we should have targeted the sector that employs 70% of our population. That's agriculture. Industry so far contributes to about 20% of our national GDP. Looking at agriculture, the traditional sector hosts and employs and have about 60-something% of our total population living in this sector. Had we targeted this sector, linking it to manufacturing, agribusiness, using the resources that we had, I think we could have a breakthrough at the time. But that's missed, and that's a lesson that we have learned. Now, more than 80% of the oil revenues have gone with our brothers in the South Sudan. We had a new country, South Sudan, separating from Sudan. Most of the oil deposits is in that part. We have now known that we also have very good deposits left in the north of Sudan. And we had a chance of discovering that we have huge deposits of gold. And we are now the second exporting country in Africa, exporting gold. That's again a new resource, a new financial resource that have come to us. And now, listening to the ideas here, having a new government, we tried to refocus the ideas regarding development and industrial development especially.
So, sir, can I ask then, what interventions do you feel need to happen now to ensure that your nation is able to now fully take advantage of the resources that you have?
First, I think at the moment we have plans to link industry and agriculture, because agriculture is where we have the big number of population. And we feel that linking processing, manufacturing to this sector is like having a kind of grassroots movement upward, lifting most of the people at the same time, leaving nobody behind. That's a slogan, and it's a target. Secondly, we want to use the resources we have at the moment in trying to intensify and increase the value chain, focusing where we have linkages, strong linkages, forward or backward linkages, where you could connect sectors, the production, processing, and export and generation of foreign currency. And this is now going on. We have plans to do it. We have started already. Listening also to you here in the past week, the concept of vision, which emphasized by our Ethiopian friends here, and some of the speakers in the first 2 days, is something that we have learned that we have to start by first is strengthening our vision towards industrialization in the coming decade. And that's something that has already come out as policies that we are doing now. So we are targeting agriculture as the main sector, but targeting it in terms of linking it to processing and manufacturing with the objective of not only self-sufficiency, but also to export and generate income for further foreign currency for further development. What we need from the UNIDO, Mr. Lee Young and his team, may be technical assistance more than money in helping us trying to formulate the kind of projects that would not only end as pilot projects, but go into projects that with a commercial production, commercial income involving a huge number of people whenever we have a pilot project. So that is a sector, and that's a vision, and that's the way we're going to move forward with our industry. One more thing, that most African countries are actually having this dual kind of formal, informal sector, whether it's industry or it is in agriculture. These people need maybe not only organization, but they also capacity building, so that when they start producing, they should have a kind of roadmap to enable them see where this production ends. We had a project for $10 million from the World Bank in the gum Arabic sector. It's a traditional sector, gum collected from trees in the traditional sector, and it's exported from Sudan. It was contributing about 15% to our exports. But what we have seen, what that 10 million can do, not in terms of money, but having a revolving fund that go into financing small producers in the different villages, collect what they have, store it, clean it, and then start to market it, gives them and enables them with a potential of negotiating power that they never had before. So I think organizing the producers at the traditional sector will enable delivery mechanisms, whether it is technology or it is finance or it is capacity building, and that makes things easier to help these produce better, increase productivity, and increase their bargaining power, and to have better prices and better values.
I'm just going to bring in Mr. Marcel here, because this is a challenge that the DRC faces as well. It's mineral rich, and yet the full potential hasn't been reached. Do you think the DRC has able to wisely and widely use the mineral resources that it has?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. Indeed, you're right. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is a country with much mining potential. We export those elements as raw materials without processing them, and that prevents us from having an added value in this sphere. In addition, we have cobalt and copper, but like those who have spoken before me, we haven't really been able to rationally use the income we've received with a view to diversifying our economy. That's a real problem that the DRC has experienced. In relation then to exporting raw materials in their raw state, why do we do that? Well, it's because we don't have enough electricity. We have INGA as an organization with responsibility for power, but it doesn't do so sufficiently to foster investment to allow us to transform these raw materials into value added. That's why, for the DRC, investing in electricity and above all diversifying its economy, as the person who spoke before me has said, is vital. The DRC's government has taken measures to facilitate investment to a greater degree in agriculture. We need to see agriculture work in tandem with industrialization. We have developed agro-industrial parks, and we're looking to develop special economic zones. Above all, we're seeking to promote agriculture and basic development by constructing many electric micro dams. We have many local areas and municipalities and hectares of arable land. And you know that without power, we won't be able to industrialize all the products of those areas. And so the government is aware of these issues and is developing a roadmap, a policy, so that we can, one, proceed to electrification through the construction of microdams throughout our country, and two, that we can then develop special economic zones as well as agro-industrial parks. That is why then, as has already been said by my colleague here, that is why we need the support of UNIDO. We need it in the form of technical assistance from UNIDO in our country so that we can develop the power industry. As we all know, electricity is the driver of development. It is what will allow our country to develop and to respond to the needs of the third industrial development decade. Thank you.
Neil Pierre, because you're from the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and we're just hearing from our panelists here, they need policy recommendations to assist them. They don't want pilot projects, for example. They want things that are implemented in the long term. So if you can assist us in understanding some of those policy recommendations from the UN.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And it's a pleasure to be here, and my thanks and congratulations to UNIDO for organizing this. I'd like to frame my response first in the context of what are the core functions of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And those core functions are firstly to conduct research and analysis on key social, economic, and environmental development trends globally. A second key function that we have is to provide support to the intergovernmental processes that take place in the United Nations, especially those in New York. And a third key function is that of providing capacity building support to developing countries. Now, to respond to your question, in fact, taking the first of our core function, I want to go back to what the ministers, the honourable ministers, in fact said. A lot of our research has in fact pointed to the fact that three core things are recommended, policy actions. First of all, sectoral integration, bringing different sectors together and prioritizing that sort of policy approach. Secondly, policy integration itself. No longer can policy be taken for the health sector or for the education sector or for the agricultural sector. A policy integrative approach needs to be considered, and that's one of the strong recommendations that come out of our research and analysis. And the third recommendation, again, going back to what the honourable ministers spoke about, is really about wise resource allocation. This must be sensible and smart and must be based on the evidence that is gathered from the policy recommendation and analysis that is done. Going to our second core function, there are several things that and ways in which we in UNDESA can support the process of advancing IDDA3. And that is particularly by channeling the information that's available into the intergovernmental discussions taking place at the United Nations. We heard from the president of ECOSOC speaking earlier on about the 3 ADI Plus and the program for country partnership, the FAO and UNIDO initiatives. Our department has been very key in facilitating that discussion that took place at the level of the Economic and Social Council. And the policy recommendations deriving from that, she spoke to some of them. We also have several other intergovernmental forums that are critical to ventilate some of the policy issues. Next year, in May, we'll be having the integration segment of ECOSOC, and there's a dedicated session in that segment where we focus on the particular needs of Africa, and that is where we can prioritize some of these policy recommendations and actions. And finally, I want to say that another very key aspect of the intergovernmental inputs that we provide is for the high-level political forum of the United Nations. This is where countries come, and in 2018, I think about 11 countries, African countries, will be presenting their voluntary national reviews or reports. And that is where we will be hearing from the EU governments on what your progress is, but also what are the key challenges and obstacles that need to be addressed. So that's our role in UNDESA, to help to channel some of the inputs that we generate into those discussions, and then to take back some of the outcomes to then do further policy analysis and advice. Thank you.
Neil, do you feel that it is a priority, these things that you're hearing? Is it in New York at the UN, are these concerns a priority?
They're very much a priority, particularly for the countries who are affected most by the need for having the right type of policy approaches. And so it is very much a priority. New York, of course, is a very a strongly politically driven intergovernmental process. And so what's a priority for one set of countries may not be a priority for another set of countries. But in the process of the discussions, the political dialogue that takes place, compromises have to be struck and the right types of forward-looking actions emerge.
Oliver, I'll bring you into the conversation. You are the director of the African Centre for Statistics, and one of the major challenges is collecting data, collecting the statistics for all of the issues that the ministers have raised.
Thank you, Moderator. I think it's very clear from what has been discussed this morning, including what we heard from the video conference, that everything has to be, all policies that have to be made have to be based on evidence-based. And this evidence-based we are talking about is actually data itself. And also there's a saying that everyone sort of wants to rhyme to it, where it says, if you can't measure it, you cannot manage it. And yet, if we are going to be talking about evidence policy making decisions that are based on data, then it means that some kind of decisions have to be made in placing much more on what data is required and what kind of investment needs to be done on data. I'm sure the ministers here will agree with me that as much as everyone has agreed that statistics are important, the question is how much is that in terms of investment is actually made to collect the data to inform the policy decisions that are being made. And that's where the disconnect is, that while at the same time we are saying statistics are important, at the same time we are not putting resources that are required to inform the policy decisions. So these are the challenges that most of our national statistical offices are facing on the continent, that this link or the disconnect between policy requirements and the data that is required. Now, talking much more precisely on industrial data and statistics, this is the situation that we have on the continent. It's not just unique to industrial data or indeed the statistics, but also the whole array of economic statistics. You'll actually realize that when the MDGs set in, there was a lot of emphasis on social data and less emphasis that was put on economic statistics. And as a result that we see on the continent now, that we don't have reliable data that would inform most of the data that is required, most of the areas that are required within economic statistics, including industrial statistics. And that is the challenge that we have. So in my view, I think the way that's been, a buzzword that is being used now is partnership. We need to start looking at who else is actually in the area to be able to work together and provide the data that is required. We need to look at the private sector, for instance, who are to a very large extent, they are the ones that major players in industrial statistics or indeed in manufacturing and the other sectors that contribute to the well-being of the economy. So we need to involve them to say, look, what is the importance of statistics? What can we do? How can they support the data that is required? That's one. But also, I think more importantly is a conversation has to start, dialoguing about the importance of statistics and particularly economic statistics. And that is lacking. And a lot of that has been left only to what they would call the policymakers, but then it doesn't include the private sector and the major players in the economy. The link is also a problem. So I think a conversation, a dialogue, a policy dialogue is required at country level where all the key players come to the table and discuss about the importance of statistics. And here I have in mind, for instance, the chambers of commerce. If they are brought to the fore and discuss about the importance of statistics and why it would improve or inform the policies that the ministers are talking about, it means they will inform their members to cooperate in providing the data that's required to inform decision-making. Now, that link again is missing because when there's a discussion about these numbers, the people that are producers or suppliers of the data are not part of it. The discussion is only left to the people that want policy decisions to be made. I'll give another example, for instance. When we talk about IDDA resolution, it talks about very good things about what needs to be done to improve the industrial development on the continent, but does not say how that industrial development is going to be informed by data. So it means that other partners...
Why do you think it's not a priority? Because it's just numbers? I mean, is that why? Because it's viewed as just numbers?
If you ask the minister, they will not say that's not a priority. They will actually say statistics is a priority. They will always say statistics is important. But the problem is, do they actually invest? Do they talk, the walk they talk? A couple of years ago, ministers agreed on the continent that they were going to put something like 0.15% of the budget to statistics. How many of those have actually been able to put that to fruition? You actually find that probably there's none. So those are things that, the pronouncements and real action are not properly linked. So I think getting the right people to come to the table, the real stakeholders coming to the table, would be critical if we have to get the transformation agenda and indeed the IDDA3 we're talking about.
We're just short on time, but we've got one short intervention here from Neil responding to that.
Just thank you, moderator. I just wanted to add a perspective on the question, why has it not been prioritized sufficiently, especially in developing countries? I come from one of those developing countries, and from a region, the Caribbean, that is really small developing country. And I know that when I speak to ministers from any of those countries, they will tell you, we don't need to know the statistics. We know what our people think. Because they're actually in touch with their populations, their constituencies. And as small societies, they know what the priorities are. However, that's for a time past. Making policy on the basis of your knowledge and understanding of the issues on the ground is good, and it was good for the past. Now it needs to be much more results-based, and this is where the shift in policy making based on evidence has come about.
We're running very short on time. I need to get to the next panel. But before I let you all go, I'm going to ask you to give me one line, as though you're tweeting, of what you see as the #1 priority for you then for the IDDA3 to be achieved. I'll start with you, Neil. One line.
I'll pass since I've talked so much. I'll let the ministers maybe.
Oh, that's Go ahead.
Very quickly, I think really it's the National Statistical Office can no longer go into the game alone. Right. They need to look into partnering with others to be able to provide the information that is required, and this is partnership is key. Thank you.
Minister?
Yes, I think development is challenging, and it needs a comprehensive approach, and including data. Actually, the level of data is quite two range, from macro up to micro. So every country has given priority for organizing itself and see from the data point of view every movement. So from Ethiopian point of view, we give a priority for central statistics data. And usually we have difference with prediction, like with World Bank, IMF. We have difference with prediction, but we have similarity with actual performance. So partnership, not only international organization, be it bilateral, multilateral, we have to give more priority for internal mobilization.
I said a line, Minister. That was a paragraph. Thank you very much. One line, Minister. I've got 2 minutes left on the panel.
Well, I think a country should know what resources they have. They should have a vision. They should have then priorities, and then they have to look for critical linkages. Thank you.
And you said?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you. I think that the major challenge to overcome is electricity. There's an absolute need for us to have electricity and also to diversify our economies. That, for us, is the major challenge that we have to overcome. Thank you.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, thank our fantastic panelists for taking us to the next stage, which is priorities. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, we're ready now for our next panel. I think our panelists in panel 1 really set the scene really well into what the priorities should be, and that really is the focus of our next session. Can I please call for panel 2, Mr. Hiroshi Kuniyoshi, Deputy Director General of UNIDO, Ms. Ezudua Deresh Briggs, Regional Director for the East and South Africa region, UN Women, Mr. Mario Pezzini, Director of OECD Development Centre, Mr. Thiera Mutombo Kalonji, Director of Industry and Agriculture, COMESA, Mr. Xianwen Pan, Founder and Chairman of the Board, Chongqing Sansheng Industries, and Mr. Erich Thiwanger, Partner and Advisor, KPMG. Hello. Yes. Yeah, sure. I believe, yes, there's a seat right there. Okay, if I can begin with you, Mr. Kuniyoshi. You heard there from our panelists some of the policies that they have in place, and they really spoke about the importance of putting the right projects in place, and they were calling on UNIDO to do that and assist them with that. Just tell us what the key elements of your organization's program framework or roadmap is to achieving that for these nations who are calling for it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yaruda Hakim, for asking me about UNIDO's roadmap for the implementation of IDDA3. This gives me a great opportunity for me to explain the roadmap, which is very important for all of us, as it will serve as the guiding maxim for the implementation of IDDA3. The sheer magnitude of activities under the IDDA3 resolution requires both good cooperation and sound implementation strategies. The IDDA3 resolution explicitly urged UNIDO to develop, operationalize, and lead the implementation of the program of the IDDA3. With that in mind, UNIDO had drafted the roadmap for the implementation of the IDDA3 to guide the process. I think you have a copy of the executive summary of the roadmap in your folder. This is the executive summary of the roadmap. And also, you can find it in UNIDO's website. Sorry. Okay. So, in this roadmap, 4 guiding principles were presented that are A, government ownership and leadership of the initiative. B, a strengthened enabling business environment. C, sectors with high potential for growth must be prioritized. D, strong partnerships for financial and non-financial resource mobilization need to be built. With these guiding principles, the roadmap comprises 6 interconnected pillars. Each pillar is built around several programs, and each of the programs is made up of several projects. Pillar 1 focuses on outreach and global forums. It aims at increasing the visibility of IDDA3, enhancing strategic dialogue and coordination among stakeholders. Pillar 2 focuses on providing strategic support for the development and implementation of industrial policy instruments. Pillar 3 is devoted to technical cooperation. It includes the development and implementation of multidisciplinary programs and projects in key areas outlined in the IDDA3 resolution. Pillar 4 is dedicated to cooperation with the African Union and its related regional economic communities. Programs under this pillar have been designed to support these institutions to effectively implement IDDA3. Pillar 5 is on partnerships and resource mobilization. Pillar 6 is in communication and advocacy. Under this pillar, an outreach campaign is envisaged to promote and publicize the activities implemented within IDDA3. With this roadmap and its 6 pillars, we have started to implement the IDDA3 with our partners. Thank you.
So, could you just give us a brief summary of how you actually intend to operationalize this strategy?
So, during the while we formulated this roadmap, we already started to consult with our colleague agencies. So we have our expertise. I mean, UNIDO has our expertise in the area of the technical cooperation. So we are implementing our activities, but together with our partners. And so this roadmap is the UNIDO roadmap. So quite honestly speaking, this is a roadmap of UNIDO, not the roadmap of the all IDDA3 agencies. But still, we formulated this with the consultation of the partner agencies. So I believe that we can work quite strategically to implement IDDA3 programs together.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to bring in Ezudua, because you work with UN Women, and as we all know through our work that women and girls are always the most marginalized. They're always often left behind. Their priorities are not prioritized, actually. Given the work that you do, how can you ensure, or what recommendations can you give to ensure that the rights of girls and women can be incorporated into this?
Thank you, Yelda. And indeed, we're very excited to have been invited here to give women and girls a voice, particularly when we are speaking about industrialization that hitherto is male-dominated in every aspect of the work. But we see IDDA3 as a valuable opportunity to mainstream gender into the policies that push the IDDA3. If you're talking about industrialization, for example, in Africa, there can't be sustainable growth when you leave half of the population behind. We still have issues of unequal work for unequal pay. We still have issues of women being in low informal sectors. We still have issues of Africa having a huge percentage of arable land. Over 70% of producers, agricultural producers, are women, yet women are not in agribusiness. They are in the informal sector of agriculture. UN Women has done a study in East and Southern Africa where we looked at the cost of gender gap in agriculture and found out that where women are not given the right seeds, the right technology, the right inputs, the right education, African countries lose millions and millions of dollars. Africa has, I think, 3 of the 10 fastest economies in 2016, but women are still left behind. Therefore, we must have policies that are gender responsive. We must include women meaningfully. If you are going to build any infrastructure, for example, I mean, just consult women, because you might just be building on their source of livelihood. So if we want to not leave women behind, we must consult and we must have their full participation in everything that we do.
How can you actually do that, though? How can you achieve the Sustainable Development Goals number 5, for example, which is gender equality and empowerment, when actually women are not at the table, they're not consulted?
Exactly, and that's why the SDGs are extremely transformative, and the SDGs have actually put gender central and front. So even though there is a particular standing alone goal as goal 5, all the goals have gender indicators. All the goals can actually, if we actually meet those goals and targets, we'll be able to say we have put women front burner. SDG 9, for example, which is what we are talking about now, we can't achieve SDG 9 if we don't have women's full participation. I mean, it's just not possible. So the SDGs we see is a vehicle, and we'll continue to work with partners to ensure that the issues of women and girls and other vulnerable groups like the disabled is actually put on the table.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Kalonji, I'll bring you into the conversation because I'm just, was reading a little bit about some of the things that the Regional Economic Cooperation, which offers a platform of pooling efforts across various different countries and platforms. So I just wanted to know from you, how can you leverage that to develop further cross-border special economic zones so that you can get the most out of it when it comes to, goods and services and markets?
Madam Moderator.
I'm so terribly sorry. I'm looking at the wrong...
black skin. Thank you very much for the question.
I believe in diversity, so I...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first express my appreciation.
Would you like me to ask you, looking at you?
Maybe he could respond.
Yes, exactly, he could. Please go ahead.
Let me first express my appreciation for having recognized the key important role that African Union and REX can play in boosting the industrialization in Africa. The African Union has a strong mandate to assist our countries to do. And for the industrialization, we have a program, the Accelerated Industrialization Development for Africa. And this has also informed the various strategies that were developed at the REC, the Regional Economic Community levels. And we are working hand in hand with our member states to make sure that this continental agenda is implemented. Now, the issue of cross-border special economic zones, industrial park, isn't new because the pattern is already in existence. We are implementing what we call the one border post, which is a cross-border customs management when it comes to clearance of goods at the borders. So it's the same pattern. We are facilitating the small traders for the cross-border trade regime. We call it the small cross-border trade regime, which is simplified at our member states level. So we can use that special economic zone or industrial park, which can be built at the border, which will imply two governments, which isn't one government, two government, specific policy and the regulation, but also the specific modality for implementation, which can offer a lot of guarantee to private sectors because they want to be only subject to one country, one government, but more than one country, which gives a lot of security. This concept is already being reflected in some of the part of Africa continent. In ECOWAS, they have started. In COMESA, we are also thinking about organizing a study to see how we can mitigate the risk, because the main issue is the risks management and mitigation. If we can come up with such a facility at the border, what type of risks we can face? So this requires a very, very deep study, government involvement, but also private sector awareness. Because we believe that to industrialize today, it isn't a question for the big players, big companies, mostly for Africa. We need the small and medium enterprise participation in the industrialization program through the value chains and supply chains, which can be created easily and managed not only at the regional level but also at the continental level as we are moving towards the continental free trade area.
And are you sensing interest from the private sector in something like this?
The private sector doesn't have the border. The border is from the government side. If you go to the borders, you will find that those who are trading across the border, they don't have that border concept. And they can cross at any time. So the private sector will be more than happy to participate to such a regional or cross-border special economic zone, industrial park, or industrial clusters. And I think this is possible.
Thank you, Mr. Kalonji. I'm looking at you now. Can I please also now bring in Mr. Mario Pezzini? You're the director of the OECD Development Center. UNIDO and the OECD already collaborate on a number of issues. How can this now be transformed or made into a priority for the IDDA3 so that they can also benefit or leverage from it?
Thank you. Everything is in the title of this session, is strategy. We have been collaborating on what? On specific policies. But you have said it all. What is the problem we are facing today? A major global challenge. It could be an opportunity. A lot of young people entering in society in Africa, because at present, for every young, there is an old person, and the old is a weight on the shoulder of the young. If the young are more, therefore, we will have a better distributed weight. But it could be a problem. A problem because of what you said, 29 million young people entering in society, not only labor market. But let's think in terms of job. We have seen already appearing some answers. And we have seen that mining can be helpful. We can further develop some activities related to mining. But let's be clear. In Australia, at present, you have $60 per square kilometer of exploration. In Africa, 5. Much more can be done, but the jobs in the mining sector are polarized, few, and declining over time. So it can be part of an answer, it's not the answer. We need, therefore, to have a public sector creation of jobs. You know how many jobs Egypt has to create in order to keep the same percentage of public employment from now to 2030? 180,000 jobs in the public sector. It's impossible to do with the fiscal revenue of Egypt and with the fiscal revenue of the country at the north of Egypt. So what are the answers if these traditional do not work? Global value chain. You know how much Africa was producing intermediary goods in 93? 1.4% of the global production, almost nothing. Now, there are the global value chain. You can specialize in a piece. You don't need a big roof. You can start in a garage, and therefore you can enter in job. But how much is produced today in intermediary goods in Africa? 2.2%. In so many years, the importance has grown, but slowly. So there is no other answer than manufacturing. That's why UNIDO and the OECD Development Center are so concerned. This is a strategic answer for a global challenge. But now, what to do? We have heard in manufacturing, foreign direct investment can be extremely helpful. You can create free zones. You can attract investment. This is what happened in China. Why don't we do the same here? Yes, that's true, but also it happened in other countries. In my country, Italy, in the past we have created big investment in the south. How do we call them now? Cathedral in the desert. If you choose the wrong sector, if you have petrochemical plants, the capacity of spillover is very limited. So we will have a lot from foreign direct investment, but not enough for 29 million new people entering every year. How do we deal with this demographic bomb? The way is to target small firms as well. They are there. The problem is they are there, but in 45% of the cases, the young people that start a job do it by necessity, not because they have a new product. because they look for a parking lot as they want to do their life, but there are no other options. So the strength is to create, at the same time, policy for free zones, attract foreign direct investment, but also strengthen the fabric of small firms that is there, very often informal, because we don't have alternative. So the Cooperation Center and UNIDO is indispensable because we are dealing with a major, major global challenge.
Thank you so much. And I'll bring in Mr. Pan into this now, because a lot of discussion about the role of the private sector and what role it can actually play to help industrialize many of these African countries. Just give us a better sense of what role the private sector can play. Mr. Pan.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Interpreter says there's a noise into the headphones. I'm sorry. There's a voice. There's a sound goes into the headphones. I can't hear the speaker very clearly. No, so I missed out a few verbs. He said he would go back to the 1980s, that 30 years ago, UNIDO came to China to support the cement development of China, and where it brought equipment and higher technology. Therefore, it contributed to the development of Chinese concrete development, economic development, and indeed, my company, the Shen Chairs, is a beneficiary of UNIDO's support. At the same time, my company is aware that in the area of pharmaceutical production, distribution is highly uneven. 70% of the global pharmaceutical production is for the developed countries, only for 15% of the population of the world. While in Africa, for instance, they need to be importing medicines. The production is very, very low. So therefore, all these added to the vicious circle that aggravates poverty. Leon, Director General of UNIDO, said IDDA3 is an important step towards Africans' industrialization. Now it enters a crucial moment. So therefore, our company will invest heavily, following the example that UNIDO helped us in Africa, by providing investment about $15 million on pharmaceutical and medicines, and $85 million on medical production. So therefore, we'll help Africa to raise their own capacity. And we'll really start by moving our enterprises into Africa, Ethiopia, and then followed by vocational education to achieve a win-win and mutual benefit outcome. We need to really help Africa to increase opportunities. We already invite universities of China to come to Africa to intensify education and human resources training. So therefore, to achieve the capacity building objectives in Africa. So therefore, they can themselves have improved capacity to develop. And then try to put some manufacturing sectors like automobile production, farm machinery, float glasses, packaging industry, and find access to market, and therefore they can create income. Therefore, to achieve the objective of the third IDDA. So for we really wish the third IDDA objective, our company will contribute to the successful implementation of the decade. Therefore, we can make our own contribution to this IDDA3. I thank UNIDO and thank all of you for inviting us to be here.
Into the conversation now, because you're from KPMG, and they've recently collaborated with the UN Global Compact to produce a series of SDGs, industry matrices. Can you elaborate on that just briefly, and then how that can actually benefit the IDDA3?
Yeah, many thanks for giving me the opportunity to sit on this panel, basically representing some sort the private sector. And we had the honor to work together with UN Global Compact. And what actually drove us was the idea which we learned from the infrastructure sector, which built up some sort of global delivery model over the last 15, 20 years. And the idea behind was twofold. The one thing was, at the end of the day, it is the private sector which needs to get engaged in order to deliver on this IDDA3. It is the private sector. And when we talk about private sector, we are not necessarily talking about, and I'm fully with you, about multinationals, global scale companies. What is the backbone of a developed industry basically are the small and mediums, which are extremely resilient, which are extremely flexible, so which build the backbone of an economy. But we need to get them involved. And the other thing that we learned is that the first step to get the private sector involved is focus. So as long as we are trying to understand this all under an asking for help idea, this is not very attractive for business. This is not very attractive for companies. And so what we did is actually we built up a matrix and took all the sustainable development goals and drilled them down per sector. And what we found then, together with the network and with a lot of help from the UN, is that as long as policy starts being dedicated and starts building up a will, this starts creating markets. And there's a lot of opportunity underneath where people then see, hey, there is somebody dedicated, giving us a framework, giving us a long-term sustainable approach to something, and then it starts being a business. So just for one example, a very small example, is getting house ownership developed. Because when you start talking about this, it needs development. It needs development in order to reduce cost of housing and to reduce logistics and those things. If there is a clear view on this will go on for the next 10, 15 years, this is what business loves, and it's a small company that go into developing things, into setting themselves up in the region, and they build on a promise which the policy needs to give, which then brings us to the question of accountability, because that's the other thing. So you only can drive focus with an accountable approach over time. But this is basically what we did, and it's called now the SDG industry matrix, and gives the first landscape about where can business be found by each and any size of business across these development goals. And I guess that's a good basis for spotting where it all could come from.
Erich, thank you so much. I'm actually being told that we've got to wrap this up and get on to the next panel, but the points that you've made here are crucial about the private sector and the role that they need to play, obviously, in moving the continent to the next stage. I thank you all for your interventions and for taking part in the panel. Thank you.
What is said is the role of the private sector and clear strategy from the public.
Yes, absolutely.
No, that's crucial.
Focus, yeah. I'm sorry.
The second question was
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our third panel now. And this one's focus will be the partnerships and resources for mobilization. So I'd like to call on my panelists to come up on stage. Mr. Haibaleit Fofak, the Chief Economist, Director Research and International Cooperation, the African Export-Import Bank. Hello. Dr. Yunju Kim, the Chief Innovation and Partnership Department and Administrator for ICT Development Fund. Mr. Luc Christensen, the lead economist, Jobs Group, World Bank. He's here. Okay. Mr. Siyong Jo, Director of the Partnership Branch, UNIDO, and Mr. Al Hussein Haidara, Office in Charge, Industrial and Trade Development Division, African Development Bank. Thank you all for joining us here on the panel. So we've had some robust discussions this morning about the policies, the priorities. Obviously, a lot of talk about the role of the private sector. But Mr. Joe, I'll come to you because you're the director of the partnership branch of UNIDO. And really, for the last couple of years, UNIDO has been implementing the program for country partnership. And you've piloted 2 of these in 2 African countries, Ethiopia and Senegal. Can you just tell us a little bit more about it and the concrete lessons that have been learnt, and then finally how that can be implemented in the IDDA3.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. As you already know that for UNIDO, starting from 2015, we start the piloting of program for country partnership in 3 countries. The first 2 pilots are in Africa, in Ethiopia and Senegal. So as you can see clearly from this, the title of the program for partnership. So as also the previous panelists highlighted a note on, say, how to basically develop industry. In this regard, we understand that fully no single agency or entity or government can do this task alone, in particular for UNIDO. So we think that it's very important to bring on board all the concerned kind of players or partners under the leadership of host government. So in the case of, say, the 2 pilot countries, PCP country in Africa, I think the success, part of this story, we think that is about this kind of, firstly, the strong commitment and the leadership of this host government. Because for industry development, say, for a UN agency like UNIDO, we cannot say impose anything. We just play the role of support this process. So with this kind of vision from the leaders of this recipient and host government, they put this industrialization on their top of development policy. So then with this all clear vision over the direction where they want to go. So with this, then UNIDO and join hands with other sister agencies, UN agencies are also development financing institutions like World Bank, African Development Bank, and other, even also most important private sector.
Because we were hearing from the ministers earlier saying that what they want from UNIDO more than anything is to formulate projects, not just have one-off pilot projects.
Yes, this is just, say, in a given country, at the national level, UNIDO is not, say, basically in the framework of PCP, we just not focus on only this kind of specific individual TC project. We firstly, say, support the government with this kind of advisory service, in particular to identify these priority sectors based on their competitive advantages. They, for example, in Ethiopia, based on their kind of, say, natural endowment and the natural resources, whatever, we support them to develop this light manufacturing industry because they think that in this sector they have this kind of competitive advantages. So leather, agro processing, and this kind of, even say nowadays we expand to include pharmaceutical. So this sector approach helps a lot. Say, technical assistance is important. For UNIDO, in the past, we just, say, carry out this technical assistance for the sake of individual interventions. But nowadays, we steer our technical assistance towards, say, unlocking the public and private investment in the identified priority, industry priority sectors. So this is the key feature. In addition, and we help the government to establish a coordination mechanism or not among these kind of inter-agencies, inter-ministries. So as the Honorable Minister from Ethiopia mentioned, that this help them basically to, say, integrate among themselves. In the past, maybe Minister of Industry may not be able to talk often, regularly with the Minister from Agriculture, Livestock, and in this mechanism with PCP, somehow this mechanism has been established. They meet regularly, they create a dialogue. Yeah. So, and identify this kind of, say, synergies among these ministries. This is one part of the story. Another that with this approach, also the Ministry of Finance and Economic Cooperation can also lead the process of resource mobilization because, say, Ministry of Finance and Economic Cooperation, they know which agency has resources, say bilateral, multilateral, including the African Bank, World Bank, and this kind of, say, any bilateral aid agencies. But they, in the past, may do this kind of own interventions separately. But with this PCP approach, then with the identified priority sectors, then Ministry of Finance and Economic Cooperation, they can lead this, say, process to pull all these kind of resources towards this identified priority sector.
I'll bring in Luke Christensen into the conversation. You're the World Bank, so you're the money man. A lot of discussion about sort of prioritizing different projects, but can you give us an insight? You've done a lot of work on the continent into financing solutions, innovative financing solutions, so that these IDDA3 can be achieved.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts on this. I think in terms of just making a comment on the prioritization of sectors, I think the industrialization purpose, an important purpose, is that it's inclusive, that it basically creates jobs. And I want to link back to the point made by the director of the Development Center from the OECD. It's not just industrialization for the sake of industrialization, it's industrialization for increasing welfare, and jobs are a very important part into that. So I think in the past, one intervention or one sort of intervention on jobs has often been focusing on skills, sort of strengthening the supply side, the labor supply side, skills building, entrepreneurial skills, etc., sort of with disregard of whether there's demand for these skills. And one of the areas we are working on today is basically towards a more integrated approach. I think on the one hand, it's not developing industry without having the supply, the demand, the skills, industry without having the labor supply needed to develop it. But on the other hand, it's not also about kind of training, skills building without seeing where people then may find a job. So first point to make is, I think, on more integrated approaches, and we're doing a number of pilots, and we also have some programs, projects going on like in Tunisia. Within that, and I think that the second part of the prioritization is which sectors. Some sectors have more potential for employment generation than others. And sort of, if there are sectors to be chosen, that should be a very important criteria. What are the employment effects of support to industrialization? What are the employment effects to any particular sector? And I think so more labor-intensive sectors directly or indirectly through knock-on effects further on, I think are a very important point. That brings me to your point. I think it's sort of a second area to touch upon. Clearly, the needs for investments are huge, vast. Just take infrastructure, where basically is a financing gap of $45 billion. So this is just not simply something public resources can meet. There are many demands on scarce public resources. And increasingly the thinking is, and we are evolving in towards a system whereby public resources can be leveraged to get more private investment involved. And sort of within the World Bank, one approach being taken is to look at all investment projects and sort of judging to what extent it's really needed to do full public financing, or can it be done more through de-risking, or even a step beyond before that, if some reforms were taken, would that be enough to make the projects commercially viable? So be more selective on that element. And maybe a final element, I think what I haven't heard today is industrialization, the industrial development decade is also happening within a rapidly changing environment. There's lots of discussion about the future of work, as we all know, where basically new digital technologies are changing how things are produced and where they are produced. The threat of reshoring is just one element in that, but it also opens up a lot of new opportunities. And I think it brings us back to the prioritization, where one wonders whether the solution is indeed for Africa not more technology as opposed to less technology, and what are then the systems to be put in place. It starts with a lot of regulatory reform just on getting access to that technology. So there are clearly reforms which could help or speed it up. But I think more focus on getting technological access, I think, is an important part of that industrialization.
Can I ask him to intervene here, because technology, you have great understanding of technology and innovation on the continent. So just going on the back of that, what critical measures can you recommend, to further elaborate?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First, let me congratulate UNIDO and the kind invitation extended to ITU for this very important IDDA3. ITU, as you know, as a UN specialized agency on telecommunication, you call it the digital technology this day, has been evolved through the technological evolution and innovation over 150 years, from mobile revolution, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and then many others, and then which has been an enabler for the industrializations, especially for Industry 4.0, as Mr. Lee just emphasized yesterday in the very converged, smart, and the digital economy, where all cross sectors or even industries from agriculture, health to energy are today ever more interdependent, and then to promote inclusive and then sustainable digitalizations and then even industrialization and development. That is why I think ITU and the UNIDO, as you can see on the screen, has signed a joint declarations and then implemented both the top-down and the bottom-up this ICT-centric innovation initiative towards a digital transformation, with the aim of contributing SDGs, especially the 9 and then 17, which means that partnership for our common memberships around the world, especially including Rwanda and Kenya in case of Africa. Answering your questions for critical measures, or even I would say and prerequisites to further industrializations learned from these joint initiatives include the first, leadership. Leadership in a sense, and the political stability and the political will, with the commitment and the vision, especially vision, at the levels of the country and even organization level for utilizing, not only utilizing, but also applying this emerging digital technology that the World Bank colleagues has mentioned, or ICT such as IoT and AI in their industrialization. Second is this enabling environment. And the first panel talked about policy. Then not only actually policy, and then but also just relevant to laws, and then transparent the policy and regulations to ensure security. We are talking about now cyber security in cyber era, safety, privacy. It was a hot issue in one of our world conference just held in Buenos Aires a couple of weeks ago. Third point is the resource. And the previous ministers mentioned about, yes, countries like Sudan and others, we have natural resources. But I don't think the resources is good enough. We need the resources for finance. Especially we need the resources for human beings, especially skills. And in digital era and digital skills, this is you're talking about the job creations, the quality of life, and the forcing industry, and then leading to from these startups, entrepreneurs, and then conglomerate, as proven by ICT-led these conglomerates today, starting from Microsoft, Google's, and then Facebook's. Why not for the youngsters and startups now for the next decades towards? The last but not least, the partnership. I just mentioned about partnership, not only just within the sector, and we are talking about partnership cross-sector, across industries, especially in the key measure for the formula of the ISID. Despite all this revolution, especially digital technologies, we faced, we realized, we experienced, and a significant still digital divide. Digital divide, especially in country in Africa. So maybe next slide. And in order to bridge the digital divide for inclusive and then sustainable development, we ITU have been implementing numerous projects through innovation for industrialization in conversed ICT ecosystem. Again, as you can see in the slides, let me highlight among many others 2 best practices based on our innovative partnership and even solutions. For example, in addition to various ICT infrastructure projects in countries like Burundi, Madagascar, Swaziland, and Burkina Faso, which means, in fact, that this the good example extended to the Pan-African project these days, together with the EC and then AU. And then I will share one example, especially in our ICT application we called and then Be Health and Be Mobile, partnering with ITU and then WHO, together with the cross-industrial partners in health and ICT sectors. More specific projects underneath of this umbrella project can go into M diabetes in Senegal, M cervical cancer in Zambia, telemedicine in Zimbabwe, and ICT tools can created for Ebola for helping those in Africa. This successful partnership project has further attracted a multi-million EC funds to establish innovation hub to invite all, especially colleagues from Africa.
Thank you very much, Kim. We'll have to leave it there, but we appreciate all. I definitely will look at that Be Healthy app. I thought that was a great one. I'd like to just quickly, because we are short on time, to bring in Mr. Fak into the conversation, because you're already a strategic stakeholder. I mean, some of the projects that the African Export-Import Bank have funded have directly supported industrialization. So really, what we want to understand from you more than anything is what recommendations you can give, to assist in this IDDA3 being successfully implemented.
No, thank you very much for bringing the African Export-Import Bank into this exercise. I'd like to thank UNIDO for its leadership and to really having special sessions on industrializing Africa. It is a very important mandate, one that is actually central to the current strategy of the African Export-Import Bank, which essentially has industrialization as one of its key pillars. And on the Plan 5, which is DUP, Africa Transformed by 2021. So we are very much fully aligned, as you said, in terms of partnership. And how do we, as a trade finance bank, which has a mandate of promoting African trade, how do we fit into the industrialization agenda? And what have we done to actually advance it? And how to say that over the years and historically, trade has been the main drivers of industrializations. It happened because there are potential for market, and that's what actually drive production and so forth. So it is very important to really see it from that angle. And when we talk about industrialization in Africa, there are a couple of constraints. We've heard some in the infrastructure space, where the infrastructure financing gap, it's more than $93 billion annually. But another key constraint that we often do not hear very much is the trade financing. The trade financing gap for Africa, it's around $120 billion. That is really the lowest end of estimations. Some believe that it's around $320 billion a year in terms of trade financing gap. So if you are really to drive industrialization through trade, we ought to actually address the issue of trade financing gap. And that's why this session becomes so important to advance that agenda. What are some of the specific actions that one may take to actually leverage more financing to finance trade, to drive trade in support of industrialization? There are a couple of options. And in the interest of time, I will focus on just a couple of them, a few of them. I think the first that one may consider from the financing standpoint is how do we make sure that we bring two partners which are willing to work together to share risk into a partnership which will bring more resources to finance a deal that one entity, corporate entity alone, would not be able to do. This is co-financing and syndications. And from where we are sitting, the African Export-Import Bank, for instance, in 2015, were able, for every single dollar that we put on the market to finance trade, we're able to leverage $7 from outside. That's the resource we brought into the continent to boost African trade through financing. The second option that one may consider in the area of financing space is essentially to look at what we call the blending financing. You may have in the DFI space some entity like the World Bank through the IDDA program may say we are able to carry the risk that some institution may not be able to do on their own. So we have risk distribution then shifted to a much larger institutions which is more able to carry that risk. It's a new model which has been very effective for low-income countries, promoted on the IDDA 17th. Another option that one may consider, still in the space of financing, it's in particular to look at the role that intra-African trade can play. Some of the key constraints to actually bringing resources for industrializing Africa have been market segmentations and fragmentations. So the moment we open that market through what is actually ongoing, the continental free trade area, then you set the continent on a path where we can actually undertake large-scale investment, something that in the past was simply not possible. Still another option that I think is very important to consider in that space, it's the options of addressing, or what I call circumventing, the current infrastructure constraint that we've heard so much, the power, the transport, and so forth, and the port. And we have two options. Either we say we are going to wait until we address all infrastructure constraints before Africa industrialize, or next question, or how do we promote industrialization on the infrastructure constraint? And that is the approach that Afrexim has undertaken by working with a number of partners in China and the rest of the world to promote the development of industrial park, which enable to actually ensure industrializations on the infrastructure constraint. We are actually involved in a number of strategic countries like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. Then it's always the case to think that when it comes to financing in Africa, the solution is always to look outward. And we've noticed recently that there are actually a lot of resources within the continent to finance industrialization and trade. And for instance, if you look at African Foreign Reserve, at some point before the end commodity super cycle in 2014, they had a reserve in excess of $500 billion. They've gone down to about $470 billion. So out of those pool of reserve, we could actually harness them to finance trade, industrialization in a way that would be a win-win in the sense that it will actually lower the cost of financing. We've seen that by drawing on our central bank deposit program, we've significantly lowered the cost of financing and providing more resources to boost trade within the continent. And then, in the interest of time, finally,
yes.
And I would like to say that another important point is that once you have a very sound and strong project, investment project, they tend to drive the resources. The work that Dangote is doing in building factory, like in the area of cement, agro-processing industries, is actually generating, bringing more resources within the continent for cross-border investment and trade.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And briefly, sir, I'm so sorry, we've come, you were short of time, and we've come to you, Mr. Haidara, but actually the African Development Bank has some really cool projects. So you're dealing with the high fives. I'm just going to list them: the Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and Improve the Quality of Life for the People of Africa. If you can briefly, in just a few minutes, just tell me about these projects and also then the effective implementation of the IDDA3 agenda.
Well, thank you so much. And the nice part here is that most of the other participants have basically provided all the answers, so I don't have too much to say. But first, thank you for the opportunity to be here and share some of the input from the African development side. The high fives are not actually projects; they are priorities areas for the bank, and they are basically a roadmap to accelerate and scale up the delivery of the bank 10-year strategy, which has two key goals. One goal being the sustainable and inclusive growth, and the other one being the transition towards green growth. And in that context, the bank strategy is very much aligned with the agenda of the IDDA. And we have been working with UNIDO in the development of some of the high fives, specifically the industrialization high five. And we've been inviting them, and we've been brainstorming, and we are working on some program together. So the high fives are basically priority areas, and industrialization being one of them has the particular feature of being central because it's cutting across all the others. And instead of talking about each of these high five, I'm going to focus on industrialization and make the link with the other high five. So industrialization, basically, I mean, it's been said by all the participants, you can't industrialize without power. And the high five related to power, which is Power Africa, aims to achieve universal access to electricity by 2025. But for industrialization, it's not simply a question of electricity availability. It's electricity availability at the right price. Because again, what we are trying to do at the African Development Bank is to push the industrialization agenda, but to do it in a competitive way, because we are, people have been talking about processing more of our natural resources. To do that, you need to have electricity, of course, but if you have electricity that costs you a certain price, you end up with a finished product that you cannot actually sell on the market because it's not competitive. So you need to have electricity, but at the right price. You can't also industrialize without having access to domestic markets. Our colleague mentioned the fragmentation of the markets in Africa. So this high five related to Integrate Africa tries to basically work on removing the internal barrier for goods and services transportation intra-Africa. And that is a very, very important aspect related to the industrialization. Agriculture and Feed Africa has all these areas of moving capital, making sure that you have enough people trained at the right level of skills, being offered employment opportunities. So industrialization is at the core of those other high fives. And basically what we're trying to do is to try to have a focused approach. So to industrialize Africa, it's a big ambition. And it has been said here, one institution cannot do it alone. We need to do this on a partnership basis. The bank has taken the approach of trying to be selective. So we have 6 what we call flagship programs. One being articulated around industrial policies, and we are working with the UNIDO on that. You mentioned the program for country partnership for Senegal and Ethiopia. We've been involved in those discussions, but basically to try to help countries having the right framework, having it right at the policy level, making sure that the right sectors are selected in their industrial policies. Facilitating the entry and expansion of businesses so that private sector can do what they're supposed to do. The second flagship for us is catalyzing more funding into industrial and infrastructure projects. The bank expects to spend about $3 billion per year in infrastructure and industrial projects. And the type of project that we're doing, I mean, we've been doing this for years. We're trying to select specific sectors, to go back to the point that you were making on prioritization. And of course, you have the natural resources. You have the minings, etc. But we're trying to select sectors such as cement, building materials, manufacturing, that is trying to not only create opportunity for export, but also to address the demand of the domestic markets, which are quite important. So I'm not sure if I can expand more than that.
No, but you've said a great amount about the extraordinary projects that you covered, and as you say, it's a mammoth task, and not one person or one organisation can do it. Everyone has to do it in partnership. And I think you've made some incredibly important points, Mr. Haidara. Thank you very much. Just in the effort to save time, I won't ask our panellists to get off the stage, but we'd like you to interact with us and ask questions. Before we do that, though, I'm sure that you've got your apps on your phones now, and we'd like to ask you a second question that's now on your screen there. It really relates to the first question, and we just want to know whether your views have changed at all since the beginning of this panel as to what is urgently needed for the successful implementation of IDDA3. So you've got the options on your app. Select them and we'll give you the results at the end of this panel. I'd like to open the floor up now to questions, but before I do that, we've got some interventions from members of the audience. So if I can call on Mr. Hans Stoisser from Ecotech to please address us. And I had told you at the beginning of the session that you had 2 minutes for these, but actually you probably have a minute now because we're short on time. So if you can, just very briefly, you'd mentioned in your book about the opportunities that Europe had missed in linking up with modern Africa. So in 1 minute, if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
So it's only 1 minute. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hakim. Well, the short answer is I think Europe relied for too long on aid instead of trade. That's the short answer, yeah? Of course, it's not that simple. But behind that was this idealistic assumption that first we need perfect conditions and then we can invest. And all of a sudden we wake up, we are waking up now, and see Japanese entrepreneurs moving companies and moving factories to the African continent and already contributing hugely, I think, to the industrialization of the continent. So I think we can learn a lot from that. And to this other part, innovations are important. We agree all on that. And I think there is also a very short answer. First innovation, then a regulation. We can learn a lot from the Kenyan example, mobile money, and from Mr. Bitangi Ondemo, the former Secretary of State of the Kenyan government, who really had a very smart policy regarding this evolvement, this innovation of mobile money. And an innovation is never the outcome of a plan. It's always an emergent property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you sticking to time, sir. Thank you very much. Can I call on Mr. Jan Bo now, the Executive Vice President of Lifan Industry? And just to let you know, he has translation, so if you'd like to put your headphones on. And Mr. Yang, I'd asked for 1 minute, so if you can summarize in 1 minute. Lifan Group is operating in several countries, including Ethiopia, on the continent. Just tell us a little bit more about the lessons that have been learnt working there, and also the advice you can give from the private sector.
Thanks for the Director General Li Yong and UNIDO to provide me this opportunity to air my opinion. Lifan Group was a top 500 enterprises. Has set up 27 automobile and motorcycle factories worldwide, including Ethiopia automobile factory. So undoubtedly, IDDA3 offers us more opportunity. What we are doing as a part of the private sector, we will keep the path of the PCP and the China government closely and take advantage of all the guidance and concept from UNIDO. Secondly, we expect a more open mentality from the government of our target markets to comply with the opportunity. More open means more flexible and even revolutionary. For example, to establish a sustainable, environment-friendly auto sector, African countries may consider reduce the import of the second-hand cars steadily to encourage the import and the industrialization of brand new car with Euro 4 or Euro 5 standard, whatever. Same story happened with when the four-stroke motorcycle replaced the two-stroke worldwide several years ago because of the emission issue. Meanwhile, if I would like to finance the lease our automobile to the end user, if the government in African countries can permit a foreigner to set up a financial company locally, of course we need the banks as a partner, like what they are. So these are related to the opening mentality to the government, which was successful, was very successful in China.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bo. And can I now call on a legal advisor for Badia, Mr. El Hafed Ould Bedi, to address us. Mr. Bedi, are you here? Can I see you somewhere? Oh, you're there. Fabulous. You're also operating on the continent, and we're just talking about financing there. Just give us a better sense of how you can significantly contribute to the financing of various projects to assist in the industrialization of the continent.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think from the debate today and the conference we can draw there are main crucial enabler or drivers that can help and that should be required to develop the industry in Africa. The first one is enabling environment. Second one is capacity building. Third one is financing. And Badia contribute to every one of these three enablers. For example, for environmental, enabling environment, His Excellency the Minister of RDC highlighted the need to implement projects for energy, which are required to develop industry. We finance the energy project, and I will add road projects to link production location to the market. Second, for capacity building, we finance through our technical assistance grant to finance capacity building in Africa. I would give an example for our brother from UNECA, highlighted the lack of data and information, but there is financing currently a project to be implemented with ACA in this field. Third one, our sister from UN Women highlighted the lack of capacity building for women, and we work with IRCBF capacity building for Africa to implement project in women empowerment and agro-business.
Mr. Bedi.
And UNIDO, the last one, sorry.
Last one.
UNIDO, we partner with UNIDO to implement some investment forum in Africa. And last, we give financing. We are shareholder in this Afrexim Bank, and we work with them through a line of credit finance, medium and long-term financing for SMEs in Africa, which is more than needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For patience.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to call on Mr. Ruben Fulchand, the Chief Officer for Africa ITC. Can I see him somewhere in the crowd? Is he here? Fabulous, great. Can you tell us a little bit more? There you are. Hi. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the challenges in terms of trade? What challenges does the continent face in terms of trade, and what's needed to redress this? If you can do that in 2 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you very much. One of the main challenges that you're facing in Africa, we have to bear in mind that 90% of trade in Africa is being done by the informal sector. And here you have small enterprises, micro enterprises, smallholder farmers. What are the problems they are facing? Firstly, compliance to standards, competitiveness, And there are so many non-tariff barriers between member states within, not only REX, COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS, but also within other groups. And also, one problem being faced by these small enterprises is access to finance, access to market intelligence. They don't know how to, where to sell their goods. But also, besides those micro enterprises, we face problems at another level. The trade support institutions, the cooperatives and the associations, they don't have the capacity to support the small companies. And here, at the institutional level, there's support that is required to enable them to support the small enterprises. But then at the macro level, one big challenge we face is the business climate. Too many bottlenecks, how difficult it is to formalize, to open a company, to have a permit to export, to import raw materials. There are so many obstacles at the level of the business climate to enable industrialization, to enable investment. A foreign investor that wants to invest in a country in Africa sometimes, of course, there are places where it's good to invest, like Rwanda or Mauritius or Senegal, for example, but in other places it can be more difficult. And here, these challenges can be addressed. At the same time, it is very important that in policy, there should be the private sector input into policy formulation. Who does business? It's the private sector, it's industry. So government has to listen to the private sector, has to listen to enterprises to understand what are their challenges and then formulate policies that really meet the challenges faced by the country.
It's certainly a theme that's been running, the importance of the collaboration between private sector and government. Thank you very much. Can I also now call on Mr. Herbert Meichner, the consultant in finance and project manager. You've got a wealth of experience when it comes to working with both African firms and Austrian firms when it comes to sustainable and renewable energy, as well as solar technology. Can you just tell us a bit about the lessons that have been learnt and then how that can be implemented in terms of what you've gained from your knowledge and understanding?
Yes, thank you, Yalda, for having me here. And I promise you I will come straight to my conclusion because of just 2 minutes, having time to bring my statement to the board. I have my own company running in Lagos as an entrepreneur since 2010. And I'm in the business fields of commodity business as well in solar power, in waste management, and actually we are about to start business in farming projects. And on the other hand, especially Nigeria is offering a wide range of opportunities to start business. And on the other hand, I'd like to address two critical issues affecting all these business fields. The first issue we've been struggling a lot is to administrative process, make the administrative process a little bit easier and faster in order to bring projects more faster into power. And secondly, it's also very crucial to get much more easier access to small budgets, for example, to finance due diligences or feasibility studies in order to bring project into power as well. So these are two critical issues I would like to address to you. And I think this will be a very effective implementation for IDDA in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Herbert. And can I now call briefly on Mr. Hussein Hassan, the representative of the African Union Commission. If you can give us a sense of what the future relationship is likely to be between the IDDA3 and the African Union.
Thank you very much. Actually, IDDA3 has been launched as a result of the continuous effort of UNIDO in collaboration with the African Commission and regional economic communities in Africa. It came really this time with the lesson learned from the practice of the IDDA1, IDDA2, and from the early phase that has been shared with the African Commission and regional economic communities. Indeed, the initiative has reflected and coherent reflected the needs of the African member state regional economic communities and really tied it up with the continental strategy of the African Union Commission and indicated to Agenda 2063 for Africa Development and Accelerated Industrial Development for Africa, IDA, as well as also link it up with the industrial strategy of the regional economic communities of REX, such as COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS, among others. So we are expected really in this way of work to be really work coherently between UNIDO and African Commission, REX, member states. Also, we are in the African Union Commission, we are processing and expected to have a side meeting, side event on the margin of AU Summit for IDDA3 to make broaden awareness and sensitization to all African member states about IDDA3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Thank you very much for those interventions from everyone in the audience. We have about 5 minutes, so I'd like to open up the floor to the audience. I can probably take 2 questions from you to put to our panelists. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hands. Yes, just at the front.
Thank you very much. I want to pose a question about how priority, they talked about priority, how to prioritize on what to give financing. What do you, how do you allocate financing? What are the projects that are important to allocate financing? And we have observed from the panel that one of the key infrastructure you need for industrialization is training and capacity building. And in that area, the investment for that is long-term. For those who want to source financing for capacity building and training, they are not looking at getting that reward in the next year, 2 years, because you need a long time to get a result on that.
They're both great questions, yes. And so I'll put that to our panelists. I can take one more at the front, and then we'll bring both those questions to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am from one of the pilot country, Ethiopia. We have this PCP, multi-billion-dollar, investment. So my question goes to the 2 banks here, African Development Bank and the Import-Export Bank. Are you really serious to finance, because they are talking a lot about infrastructure financing. So I would like to hear from them if they are really willing to finance this from going from policy advisory role into concrete.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So the first question we had was, well, both questions are actually about financing and how you can allocate the finances. And a second thread to that question was capacity building and training. So I'll put the first financing questions to our banking side here. So whoever wants to briefly answer those questions in terms of allocating funds. Sure, you take it, Mr. Haidara.
2 things. First of all, I think for the allocation of funding for financing of specific project at the African Development Bank, the way we look at it is that we first try to distinguish between private sector project and public sector project. For private sector project, we don't have a specific envelope that is allocated upfront. It depends on the project that is presented by the sponsor of the project, and we look at the project from a commercial viability point of view, and the sector where it is focusing on, and if it's if it is aligned with the strategy that we have. I guess your question is more related to the public sector financing, and at the African Development Bank we receive funding from certain countries, and we use that funding to basically look at programs, development programs from several countries, in the case of Nigeria. And we are basically funding infrastructure project, to answer the other question that was the second question pose on infrastructure financing. We finance road, ports, a number of infrastructure projects, and basically it's for the country to basically prepare their financing request, send it to us, and we are looking at them and we're discussing with the country in terms of the country priorities, IFDB's priorities, and we try to come up with the financing for that. Now, the last one on training and capacity building, this is an important one. Usually we don't, these are what we call non-lending type of initiatives. But what we have trust funds available. The recent one that we have is something that it's an initiative that we supported that is called Boost Africa. It's about 220 million euros put together by the African Development Bank and the European Investment Bank. And the use of this money is to basically provide trainings to young entrepreneurs
and capacity building. Yeah, and I've got 1 minute, so I'll give 30 seconds to you and 30 seconds to you.
I think I will be quick. And the two questions are actually related, in the sense that you're talking about soft infrastructure, and Ethiopia is talking about hard infrastructure. And sometimes the sustainability of hard infrastructure depends on the soft infrastructure, the engineering skills that we need, not just to build infrastructure, but also to maintain them. So the two questions are actually central. In terms of financing, I think it's quite clear that the resource that we need just for the hard infrastructure, the physical one, are such that no single institution can actually lead on that front. As far as Afrexim Bank is concerned, we've considered that the African Development Bank, the World Bank, should actually lead on the infrastructure financing front, but we've been actually specifically targeting what we call trade supporting infrastructure, the port, the railways, to connect the continent in terms of financing. But in terms of the soft infrastructure, which is critical for structural transformations, it is very important that those who are actually financing educations within the continent put the priority on engineering institutions, without which we are not going to achieve industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you. And just briefly, Kim, if you can address that as well.
Thank you very much. In fact, IT also has some ICT development fund. Actually, majority of that fund is also going to the capacity building. As I mentioned, one of the very critical elements is human skills. And then so that the digital skill training is one of our priority. So we have a website. So if you have any interesting quality project which is
sustainable for multi-stakeholder partnership required, and then you're more than welcome to invite. Thank you. And just briefly, sir.
Thank you. Since UNIDO is the specialized agency focused on technical assistance service, so I think the question related to the training and capacity is very relevant to us. Because I think when we talk about the resource mobilization for IDDA3, I think the most important part is about the capacity gap. You're very right. Not only resources are abundant everywhere. But the thing is that people are aware of whether you have this quality project, then banks can put money there. So I think this is very relevant for us. Basically, you can view this issue from two angles. One is the micro level. This capacity gap is about the policy making. This will ensure the government make this kind of necessary reform and changes to regulatory framework and regime that can create an environment for investment to come. Then at the macro level and enterprise level, the skills of neighbors, we need this. Then the investors come, they can immediately hire workers. Then I think you need to, on these two fronts, we have these interventions on the PCB framework.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank all our panelists for their interventions and their comments. That brings today's session to a close. I wish you all a success in achieving your IDDA3 roadmaps to that. So congratulations to you all, and I wish you success. Thank you. Thank you.